In relation to this year conference, which explore intercultural competence in the EAP context, this presentation tackles the intersection between EAP and intercultural communicative language teaching with the aim of providing insights into the current approaches to intercultural education and pedagogy. My name is Umar Al-Harbi and I'm a lecturer at King Abdelaziz University. Currently, I'm a PhD candidate in applied linguistics at the University of Reading. As part of my second year PhD research that is supervised by Dr. Erhan E.Aslan, we explored the Saudi EAP teachers intercultural communicative language teaching ICLT, perceptions and practices. The findings of this part will be further utilized to develop and then implement a context-based ICLT framework in a Saudi EAP public context. Firstly, the presentation will give an overview of the research project. I will provide some background details with regard to intercultural competence and EAP, the significance of EAP teachers or role in intercultural competence teaching, and highlight specific aspects in the Saudi context. Then, the research gap and focus will be prepared, followed by the research question and methodology. The key result of the research will then be discussed with a focus on the demographics, the conceptualization, and degree of familiarity with the target culture. The teacher perceptions of EAP teaching objectives and cultural teaching objectives, and their self-reported teaching practices. The presentation will be concluded with a reflection on the research findings and what implementation can be derived from a better understanding and intercultural teaching in the EAP context, both locally in Saudi Arabia and globally. Just to give some background to the research project, the intertwined relationship between linguistics teaching and intercultural teaching is not a new concept and has been featured quite heavily in research. As an outcome of this teaching, teachers aim to develop their learners' intercultural communicative competence, ICC, which has been defined by Byron, Terdoff, and others, as person ability to communicate effectively and appropriately in intercultural situation based on his and her or her intercultural knowledge, skills, and attitude. The idea of appropriateness here implies that learners are aware of the cultural differences between their culture and the culture of the EFL. Among the various contrasts to foster IC develop learners' ability, EAP classroom are prime settings. It is at these EAP classes that teachers can implement socially and culturally sensitive teaching methods, as well as instructional materials that represent both local and international cultures. Yet, to achieve a successful integration of ICC development into EAP classes, it is essential to explore and investigate EAP teachers' perception and teaching practices. That is because EAP teachers' perception and teaching practices impact their teaching methodology, which in return leads to either fostering or hindering their implementation of ICC that would aim to enhance their students' ICC. So, exploring EAP perception and teaching practices is crucial for the development of effective ICLT in EAP education. The question now is where Saudi EAP teachers stand in their intercultural education. As a monocultural context, Saudi Arabia is keen to preserve its culture and religious practices in the face of globalization. Research such as Al-Hasnan, Ilyas, and Picard affirm that Saudi are highly role-oriented and are known for their unique social characteristics, such as belonging to a tribe or sub-communities, whereas cultural traditions dedicate Saudi behavior. As an essential components of this context, the Saudi educational system reflects the country's contemporalism. It is centrally managed by the Ministry of Education, in which EAP teachers reinforce the centrality of education. A Saudi EAP teacher is defined as a master who knows everything and governs a teacher-centered classroom. Currently, and recognizing the significance of ICC for the Saudi EAP learners, Saudi Arabia is undertaking several governmental and educational reforms that support and encourage intercultural education. Subsequently, these intercultural-oriented education reforms and the integration of ICC into the EAP context have been the subject of extensive research, investigation, for example, Al-Fahadi and Abdullah. However, there have been a great need to investigate the extent EAP teachers conceptualizing and neutral intercultural competence language teaching, ICLT, which is precisely the aim of this research. To fill this research gap, the current research was guided by the question, what are the perception and ICLT practices of EAP teachers working at Saudi Public University? Through an answer of this question, we aim to explore ICLT in the EAP context for four essential angles. EAP teacher conceptualization of the target culture and countries, frequent associated with the EAP-EFL, their degree of familiarity and means of contact with the target culture, their perception on ICLT practices, and finally their self-reported ICLT practices. The research was conducted at a public English Language Institute at King Abdulaziz University in Saudi Arabia. In this higher education context, EAP students are first-year college students who are studying academic English in order to major in a specific field such as medicine, engineer, English literature, or even teaching. Their proficiency level are determined by a placement test and range from beginner to pre-intermediate. The research data was collected via an online questionnaire with closed and open-ended questions. The questionnaire was adopted from Sercu. However, to ensure the originality of the instrument and that it addresses the research purpose and context, several changes had been done to the original instrument. First, the questionnaires sections were reconstructed to address the research question. The context of the questionnaires and the items included were tailored to reflect the Saudi sociocultural and educational context. Finally, the wording of the whole questionnaire was modified. And then the assessment type of the closed-ended questions was unified to ensure clarity and consistency. By conducting a series of modification and changes, we created a context-based research instrument that explored the perception and ICLT practices of EFL instructors working at a Saudi public university. The data were analyzed through descriptive statistics of the quantitative data and context analysis of the qualitative data or open-ended questions. Okay, 103 participants completed the questionnaires. Among them, 71 were male and 32 were female. The participants' age varied between 30 to 60 years old, with the majority in their 40s. The majority of the participants hold a master's degree, about 60%. 49 of the participants were Saudis, while the non-Saudi were 54, including British and Pakistani and Indian. Several languages were stated at the participant native language, including Arabic, English, Greek. The majority have more than 20 years of experience, about 34%. To establish an understanding of teachers' conceptualization of the target culture, they were asked to indicate which countries they normally associate with the target culture. The findings revealed that though EAP teachers associated varying culture with their EAP teaching, most of them limited that to the culture of inner circle countries. The limited conceptualization may suggest that EAP teachers in the Saudi context still seek native-like development in their teaching, in contrast with the global established significance of developing different Englishes, with the increased interest in English language franca. Beside their target culture conceptualization, teachers were also asked to indicate their degree of familiarity with the specific target culture aspects, such as history, geographic, holiday, and so on. In general, the teachers deemed themselves familiar with the target culture. However, their responses suggest that their knowledge is strongest in the cultural domains normally addressed in foreign language textbook. For example, there were most familiar with the daily life routine and sociocultural condition, in contrast to being least familiar with the political and religious aspects. In addition, these findings suggest that the teachers were well equipped for cultural teaching in the traditional sense of passing on knowledge about the target culture. Teachers were further asked to indicate how frequently they kept in contact with the target culture people, as it may imply different degree of their integration into the target cultures. It was not surprising that media was chosen as their most frequent approaches. On the other hand, over half of EAP teachers stated that they never or rarely participate in culture training program or language courses, which indicate that the strictly of ICLT professional development in the Saudi context. This in turn implies that existence of unsystematic and varying degree of ICLT implementation among the teacher. With regard to the teachers' ICLT perceptions, two findings were significant. Through the teachers acknowledged the significance of ICLT, they held two opposing perception. On the one hand, they affirmed the necessity of implementing ICLT in EAP context to enhance students' ability to handle intercultural, but they argued that ICLT would not necessarily result in a positive outcome, such as increasing students' openness, tolerance, and empathy with the target culture's peoples. These opposing stands highlighted the assumption that EAP teachers do not believe in the effect of their teaching, nor do they believe in the effect of a proper intercultural education. What about EAP teachers? Teaching perception and their intercultural interculturally oriented. Regardless of their importance, the assumption and perception do not draw a clear representation of ICLT in the Saudi EAP context. It is through a comparison to the teachers' teaching practices and their daily teaching that teacher personal, often implicitly, theories of teaching can be seen. Overall, the research findings revealed that teachers' acknowledgement of the significance of ICLT was reception-oriented and did not translate it into the classroom's practices. 90% of the teachers devoted more teaching time to language over cultural teaching. Just over 8% of the participants fully integrated the language and culture. In an in-depth analysis of the teachers' self-reported teaching practices indicate that they were adhering the influenced by the Saudi sociocultural, educational, and pedagogical features. Each aspect will be further discussed in the following slides. Despite the familiarity with the target culture aspect and acknowledgement the significance of developing their students' intercultural competence, EAP teacher avoided discussing controversial topics. 60% of the teachers implement target culture, daily life routine, such as shopping, food and drinks, etc., in their teaching. Never implemented religious traditions of the target culture in their teaching. In addition, they prioritized the implementing students' native culture and reinformed the emphasis targeting culture aspect. 40% of the teacher never exposed their students to materials that allow them to recognize the diversity in target culture. Half of the teachers never or rarely provided opportunity for their students to interact with the people from the target culture. These teaching practices indicate that teachers' adherence to the Saudi sociocultural condition. Teachers evenly adhered the educational condition of the Saudi culture. EAP teacher supported only syllabus policy decisions and prioritized the exam-oriented teaching approaches. They maintained the traditional teacher-centered ICLT approach, which basically deemed linguistics and communicative proficiency outcomes. The lack of any ICLT professional development or training had an influence on the teacher's self-reported practices. through they deemed themselves familiar with the target culture or cultures. ICLT was addressed in a varying degree of ICC, was not systematically developed. 85% of the teachers revealed that they discuss facts about the target culture when students come across them during the teaching of their textbook. Where can we go from here? What are the implementations that can be drifted from the research findings? At the local level, the three majority implications can be taken from our research. First, the research affirmed that significance of including EAP teacher in the educational decisions and reforms initiatives through exploring their perception and teaching practices. Second, this research asserts that knowing how to teach ICC is as important as being aware of its significance. The essential encouraging enhancing professional ICLT development for the teachers. Finally, this research confirms that teachers should be equipped with an intercultural-oriented teaching approach that addresses the Saudi sociocultural and educational variables. In fact, a context-based ICLT framework would encourage EAP teachers to effectively and properly implement it. On the global and international EAP level, this research emphasizes that the necessity to increase research that is reoriented to a specific EAP context. Oriented research would initial conceptual of the ICLT instruments as what had been done to adopt the questionnaire. The context-based instruments that has been created in this research can be used in investigating EAP teacher perception and ICLT practices in contexts that share similar sociocultural and educational features with the Saudi EAP context. Additionally, this research affirmed that focusing on reoriented research, initial contextualization of ICC practices. It is only with more research reoriented to specific context we will be able to make a greater conceptualization of the ICC practices in EAP. To conclude this research, to conclude this presentation, we covered some of the key results of our research that aim to explore EAP teachers' EAP perception and teaching practices. Guided by these results, the next steps of the research is to develop and implement a context-based ICLT framework with the goal of resolving the tension that are reported to hinder Saudi EFL instructors' implementation of ICLT. As the work is on progress, please feel free to get in touch with me via email. The address showing here. I would welcome any feedback and suggestion. These are the references for this presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.